Welcome to Between Over and Next with your hosts, Holli and Robert, a happily married couple who explore the space between what was, what is, and what's to come. From career changes to navigating life's uncertainties, this dynamic duo will empower you to live your happiest life at every age and stage. So, get ready because your journey with Holli and Robert starts now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Between Over and Next. Hi, Holli.
Hi, Robert. Radio, television, commercial advertising, film. Who do you think of?
G. Keith Alexander.
That's right. He is a New York City icon.
He is indeed. And I'm happy and thrilled that I got to meet him and have now become colleagues and friends.
Where was the first place you ever met him? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was actually during Harlem Week.
Thank you, Harlem.
Thank you, Harlem. So it was my second year of Harlem Week. The first year I was with Harlem Week, it was during COVID, so we were all virtual. And then when we came back in person, I got to work with G. Keith on the three major days during Harlem Week, which is Summer in the City, Great Day in Harlem, and Harlem Day, which happens either Grant's Memorial or 135th Street in St. Nicholas. And G. Keith, along with Debbie B., do all the backstage interviews with all the talent and the politicians and the celebrities and people on the street, and really unbelievable experience. And so I got to work with G. Keith and have worked with him since. This is my fifth year, and Harlem Week is celebrating its 50th year. So I'm thrilled and honored to be a part of that and to have gotten to know G. Keith during that time.
And I'm glad I got to meet him and get to know him, too, from those events that I've attended that he's emceed. He's a cool guy. He's a happy guy. He's a fun guy. And he loves being in the world of music and entertainment.
Yes, and the consummate professional. And not only do I get to work with him during Harlem Week, but the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce relies on him throughout the year to MC a number of events. And no matter how much prep time he has, and a lot of times that's not a lot of prep time, and there have been times where he's walked onto stage with a script just being placed into his hands, and you would never in a million years know that. You would think he's had that script for months, and he's worked on it. He's just
a true professional.
And as you'll come to see as we talk with G. Keith, he's a natural. This is so in his element with a microphone in front of him. It's just really amazing.
So, meet G. Keith Alexander.
Hi, G. Keith. We are so thrilled to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Holli and Robert. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we'd be remiss if we didn't start by saying that you're going to recognize this amazing voice as we go on, as the person who actually introduces us each and every week when we start our podcast. You're an amazing addition to our show to have you do our open and our close. So thank you at the top for that.
You're quite welcome. I'm very, very much honored to be here, and I'm very much impressed with what you and Holli have created, and I'm just thankful that you guys thought of me.
Well, thank you. I do really believe, and I say this to Holli all the time, that I really believe that there are no coincidences in life, and that the people who we come to know and get to work with and get to become friends with, I think we're kind of destined to meet those people, and you're certainly one of those people. And to be able to get to work with you during Harlem Week and other assorted things throughout the year now has really been a highlight for me in the whole bigger picture of working together on Harlem Week. And I'm really honored, and all of you will come to see why I feel the way I do as we learn more about you. But it's really these last 4.5, 5 years have really been terrific in getting to know you and getting to work with you. So thank you for letting me into your world professionally and personally.
Wow, it's very nice of you, Robert. Thank you. I really feel as though, having worked with you, I've learned a lot, and you're quite knowledgeable about this media and production business. So thank you.
And this is why you actually asked G. Keith to be our voiceover.
Well, exactly. I have to tell you, being born in Brooklyn and growing up in Staten Island, and I think about music and how I got to be such a fan of music, and I owe it all to radio. We all went out and bought music as kids growing up, but it came down to hearing songs and music on the radio. And to have you as our guest in talking about your career and the pivots that you've made all along the way just fits so well to have you as the guest on Between Over and Next. So let's go back to the beginning, to the 70s.
Okay. All right.
In New York radio. A lot of our listeners may have no clue as to what that time was like. So take us back to that time when you started in what we know now as terrestrial radio.
I was conceived in New Orleans and I was born in Chicago. And having been born in Chicago, there was quite a bit of radio that I used to listen to in the evening. And I always thought that the DJ that I was listening to, his name was Herb Kent, the Cool Kent, that he was just talking to me. I didn't know anything about anybody else listening to radio. I just thought this guy was sitting on a stool with a spotlight over his head, and he was talking to me. I somehow decided that one day I wanted to be a DJ. My mother used to buy World Book encyclopedias every other year. So I would sit on the floor and I'd thumb through all the volumes of World Book encyclopedias while listening to the guy on television, WLS Chicago television, say, WLS Chicago. And I didn't know that was a job, but I used to like what he was doing and I used to try to emulate him. So when I got into fifth grade, sons put everyone up against the wall and asked them, what do we want to be when we grew up? And I said I wanted to be a radio announcer, radio DJ. It just so happened that when I got out of the Marine Corps and got a scholarship to Fordham University here in New York at Lincoln Center, while in Fordham, I got introduced to radio. And I got introduced by way of, I had a little $20 that I would go down every Tuesday and pay this guy. So I would be on the radio at 5:15 a.m. every Tuesday for 15 minutes, long enough to say hello, play 3 records, and say goodbye. And I would record this on a cassette recorder and bring it to class. And my fellow students would laugh at me and say, oh, G. Keith, you'll never be a DJ. You'll never be a DJ. And so one day, I'm on my way to the bank, and this was during a time when if you didn't get to the bank by 3 o'clock, the doors were closed and you had no money. So I'm at Fordham, and I'm trying to get down the escalator, and these 3 female classmates tried to stop me. But I broke away, got outside the door, and as I'm heading to the bank, this part-time DJ I had met a couple of weeks before, he said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to the bank. He said, come go with me. I'm going to get some records from this record company. And at that time, that's when they used to give away free records, free albums to all the DJs because they want you to be familiar with the music. So I go with him, and I meet a guy named Rocky G. Now, Rocky G used to be on WWRL as a program director and as a talent. And I met him, and I was in another room making a phone call, and I heard him tell the DJ, you know, my friend Frankie Crocker just started a new radio station up in Harlem, and he's looking for DJs. So I come running out the room, and I said, hey, I'd like to be a professional DJ, because he had listened to my little cassette recorder, and I had asked him if he wanted to buy advertising, And he said, "Oh, let me think about it, kid. I did not know that my little 15-minute radio show didn't mean anything to anybody. It probably had no listeners. So he wasn't going to buy advertising. But when I told him I wanted to be a DJ on big time radio, he picked up the phone immediately. It was a dial phone at that time, where it was a little big black dial phone. He picked up the phone and he called Frankie Crocker. And I heard him say, "Hey, Frank, I used to do radio station up in Harlem. Hey, and you're looking for DJs. Hey, I got this good-looking kid here. Maybe you ought to give him a shot." So Frankie said, "Okay, we'll have him come up to the station at 4 o'clock on Thursday," or whatever day it was. So I go up there, and that's where I meet Frankie Crocker for the second time, because I'd met him one other time in the park, taking pictures with him. But the second time that I met him was when he hired me. Now, I'm editing the story, but that's how I got into radio. And when he said to me, "You're going to be my music librarian. You're going to take care of the music library. And when I come into the radio station at 4 o'clock, I want you to be standing at the door with my records and the copybook." The copybook was where, at that time, we used to read commercials live from the copybook. So when he came in, I'd be standing there with the records and the copybook, and he'd take them and go in and he'd start his show. And that's how my radio career started.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you talk about how it being so early in the curve of radio, it lasted a long time like that. Radio, to me, kind of had a certain format and a certain way you did things and a certain way you got heard. And it's kind of very unique in a sense. Was it that producers wanted to control the industry, or it seems like it was almost as something that prevented artists from excelling and it being chosen by the industry? Was that true? Is that just a perception that I have?
If you were a person who wanted to create music and be a musician or recording artist, singer, or anything like that, you were at the mercy of the record companies. But then the record companies was at the mercy of the radio station, and the radio station was at the mercy of the program director. So there was a system by which you had to go through. You just couldn't one day say, "I'm going to be on the radio." You had to go through the system. And back in those days, sometimes you had to pay your way through the system in some form or fashion. Nowadays, things are a little different. Things have changed. Radio is not the radio we once knew, and it's not necessarily important for you to get your music on radio because there are all these streaming platforms that you can get your music on. So radio has changed, and that feeling that you had about your perception of radio is accurate, but it's different.
In the early days of radio, when you started having access to the artists themselves, I would think that they would want to get that extra airplay of being able to have an interview done. Was access to celebrities easier then, you think, than it is now?
Well, I got to tell you, because we were WBLS and we were the radio station that broke artists in the New York radio area. When it came to R&B music and soul music, we were the station. So artists would come to town and they would want Frankie to interview them. And in doing so, they would allow us to utilize their talents by our having concerts, or if we gave a dance or a discotheque, they would come by and they wouldn't charge us. And if we were going to have a concert with them, we wouldn't have to pay as much money to book them. So yes, artists were throwing themselves at radio back then because it was just the radio and their records. There were no other outlets. American Bandstand was another outlet that artists were able to go to, but radio was where they really, really wanted to be. So radio was very important.
What was your first on-air job?
I was the music librarian, and Frankie told me when he hired me, he says, you're going to be the librarian, but when I take off on the weekend, you can sit in for me. And so I knew nothing about professional radio. The little 15-minute show that I did, I kind of made it up as I went along. But when I got to WLIB FM, which became WBLS, I was like the part-time guy, on-air guy that sat in for Frankie Crocker whenever he took off. In the beginning, he just took off on Saturdays and Sundays. He didn't want to work, so I sat in for him. But then later on, as I got better, he would take off maybe a day during the week. So I would sit in and be on his air shift, which was from 4 to 8. But what used to irk me was that he had a drop that they would put on that said, when Frankie Crocker isn't on your radio isn't really on. Now I'm sitting there, I'm sitting in for Frankie, but this thing is saying, when Frankie Crocker isn't on your radio isn't really on. I felt like, well, what am I doing here? That sort of thing.
But there had to be a moment when you became your own personality on radio, right?
Yes.
When was that moment?
I started getting fans who were listening to me on the radio on the weekends, because, on the weekends, you got people out at the beach and the park and washing their cars and listening to the radio. So I started becoming known to the public. Then I got known as the person that sat in for Frankie Crocker. There's an old adage that I learned a long time ago, East Indian adage, and that is, boy to the king is king of the boys. So because I sat in for Frankie Crocker and I was like his assistant, all the other people that worked at the radio station, Vi Higginson, Kenny Webb, Johnny Allen, Al Rogers, Lamar Renee, they sort of took instructions for me, because Frankie would then give me the instructions to give to them. So I was seen as part of the management, so to speak. So as I'm coming into my own, I started producing dances, we call them discos then, and I started producing those with Frankie. So now the record company started calling me Frankie's boy. So I started getting popular that way. Then I got a call from one of the talent agencies one day for me to do a voiceover for one of the hair products. I did that, and they would play the commercial on WBLS. So Frankie didn't quite like that too much, that my voice was on this ad. So then I started getting more popular, because people would hear my voice even when I wasn't on the radio. Then Roy Ayers, the great jazz xylophonist, Roy Ayers, we were sitting in a bar one day, and he says, hey, why don't we go in the studio and do something? So before Barry White hit the airwaves, I went into the studio with Roy Ayers, and I did something called Sneakers. And it was on the Polydor label. And for a long time, a few weeks, Frankie wouldn't play it. He wouldn't play it. Then finally, he played it. So now people are hearing me. I'm becoming an artist, okay? So now Frankie is starting to think, well, maybe he has created something that might be out of his control.
Did you sense those pivots that were happening? Because it seemed like that happened fairly quickly.
It did happen quickly. One thing I left out was, after I got hired over at WBLS, about 3 months before that, I used to sell 8x10 glossy pictures in front of the Apollo Theater. So I used to be a street merchant selling the 8x10 glossies of the photos of the artists who were at the Apollo during that week. And sometimes James Brown and the Temptations were in town. Me and my mentor, Alton Collier, we'd make like $700 cash. So the Apollo Theater used to chase us from the front, and we'd run around the back and catch the people coming out the back door. So now, 3 months later, when I get hired at WBLS, I get a call from the Apollo Theater to come and be the MC for the Temptations and Spinner show for a week at the Apollo Theater.
Wow.
Sometimes 2 shows a day, sometimes 3 shows a day. and I was the MC. It got to the point people started telling me Frankie was jealous. Now, I love Frankie because Frankie gave me my start, and we worked together, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am now. But he started getting a little jealous from what people were telling me. And then from there, he thought he would sort of get rid of me. And that was when some people from Chicago called in and said, hey, we have a radio station in Chicago, and we'd like for you to program the radio station, Frankie. So Frankie decided, you know what, G. Keith is from Chicago. Let me send him to Chicago, and he can help me program the radio station, and he'll be out of my hair. So that's what happened. And there's a whole other story of how I got back to New York and worked with Frankie again. And
So how much time did you spend in Chicago?
From 1975 to 1977, I got fired in Chicago because they wanted to get rid of Frankie as being the off-site program director of the radio station. And since I was the music director and had a shift from 12 to 4, they wanted to have more control of the radio station. So they brought in some guy from Arizona. They fired me and fired Frankie. And so Frankie had always told me, if you get fired there, you can come back and work at WBLS. But when I came back, the management there didn't hire me back. So I went to WRVR, which was a jazz station, worked there until I got fired at the jazz station. That's another story. You know, DJs are always getting fired.
Well, I was just going to say that there might be people that are listening to this and saying, gosh, what a horrible industry. But that was part of the culture. And a lot of times the firings were to big news, and they did something and they were fired. And then a year, 18 months later, they were hired back by the same radio station, probably different program director or station manager. It seems at that time that all this radio talent was just kind of flowing back and forth between radio stations.
Exactly. In fact, I've worked at WBLS 3 times, and this is the 50th year of WBLS, along with 50th year of Harlem Week. So, yeah, people float back and forth between radio stations here in New York. That happened quite a bit. And
So, is that still happening today? Are there still aspiring DJs and voiceovers?
yeah, there's still aspiring people who want to be on the radio, and also people want to do voiceovers. Both of those, it has changed to some degree, because now if you want to be on radio, but you can't get on radio for some reason, you just start a podcast. If you want to do voiceovers now you don't necessarily need an agent to do voiceovers. You can go to their 2 websites. One is called voices.com, and the other is called Voice123. You can upload your demo there, and if a producer decides that they like your sound, then they'll send you scripts through the internet. And when you get your scripts, you can have your microphone at home and your software, and you can record the scripts and send them back to the producer. And if they like the way you sound, then they'll hire you right off of the internet to do work for them. You got the union work and you got the non-union work now.
You also have been a coach in the world of voiceover, right? You worked for many years teaching others.
Yes, I've done over 1,000 national radio and TV commercials. Back in 2003, I decided that I was going to start Voiceover Academy, where I would coach people. And I did that until 2015 or 2016. Then I decided to put that aside and work on developing Harlem America. My agent over the years have tried to get me to come back into the business to do voiceover, but I refused because I wanted to focus on Harlem America. However, during that period of time, for about 20 years, I was the announcer for the Apollo Theater's galas, spring galas, and then I've done announcing for the Urban League and for Oprah Winfrey and people like that. But that's my announcing gigs as opposed to doing actual voiceovers for national products.
Anytime you help to shape an industry, which you have, you've had such a career that I think you can kind of almost talk about it in decades of time. What was your favorite decade in radio?
I'd say my favorite decade had to be during the 80s, from 78 through 86. That was really the real highlight of where I really became G. Keith Alexander on the radio. And I'll tell you why that is. In 1978, when I got fired from WRVR, I decided that, okay, you haven't seen the last of G. Keith Alexander yet. And I heard that they had just started this radio station. It was a mellow music radio station, and they had just started it, and they only had one guy on there that knew anything about disco music. And disco had just come into being, and this was 1978, July 1978. It was called WKTU. And WKTU had one guy on there, Paco. And
I still remember his voice.
I was 16 years old.
Really?
Great time.
So when I got fired from RVR, I called up WKTU and I said, hey, I'm G. Keith Alexander. I'd like to work over there with you guys. So the general manager had me come over, and he says, all right. So he hired me, and I think the first gig they gave me was overnight. And then about 3 weeks later, I went to New Orleans to visit my family, and I got a phone call, and he says, hey, it seems like you're the only guy around here that's really played this type of music before. So we're going to give you a slot from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., middays. I said, great, fantastic. So during that period of time, I became known as the Disco Kid. I was out roller skating every night at some of the well-known roller skating rinks. I was in discotheques just about every night. And there was this one place called Regine's. It was a private club on Park Avenue. And I became the person that Regine would have host all of her private parties. Whenever she'd have the celebrities, the politicians, the people from the news outlets, the gangsters, they would all be in Regine's. Sometimes the gangsters would send the politicians a bottle of champagne, and they were all friendly inside the club. But when they got outside the club, they act like they didn't know each other or didn't associate with each other. But I was always the guy who hosted the private parties. So I got a chance to meet a lot of celebrities. I met Brooke Shields when she was 16 years old, and they said, G. Keith, we have somebody over there we'd like for you to meet. She's going to be very big one day. I said, oh, okay. I didn't know who they were talking about. They took me over. They introduced me to Brooke Shields and her mom. Then one day I'm walking into Regine's, and the maitre d' says, G. Keith, Miss Diana Ross is in the house. Would you like to meet her? I said, oh, sure. Okay. Sure. So I'm figuring out, how am I going to be memorable to Diana Ross? So as I'm walking over, I decided that I knew what would make me memorable. And so when they introduced me to her, she was sitting down. So I just kind of knelt down on one knee, and we talked for a little bit. And I said, I never liked the Supremes. And she looked at me, and I said, well, I used to go visit this young lady just about every day. And when I'd go visit her, she'd have this record on called Baby Love, Baby Love. And that's all she would play all the time. That's why I didn't like the Supremes. Well, she didn't like that too tough, of course. A couple of weeks later, I'm at the radio station, and I get a call and saying that Diana Ross had this album out called I'm Coming Out. Remember that record?
Oh, yeah.
It was a double album set, and she had a blouse that was kind of tied at the waist, and she had on these short pants, real short pants. When she came to the studio, I interviewed her, and after the interview, I said to Diana, I'd really like to kiss you. Now, there was a room full of people in there. The people that had brought her in, they were standing there. And I said, I really would like to kiss you. I'd like to be able to tell my son one day that I kissed Diana Ross. So she says, oh, okay. Well, she took me off guard. She puckered up her lips like this. And when she did that, I just couldn't bring myself to kiss her on the lips. So I kissed her on the cheek. She was kind of stunned that I didn't kiss her on the lips. She kind of open her eyes like that. And so I didn't do it. But anyway, I then said to her, would you autograph my album? So she opened up the album and she autographed it right across her, you know what, the double album, short pants. She put on there, G. Keith, I like your kiss or something like that. So she left. She was staying at the Sherry Netherland Hotel over on Fifth Avenue. I sent her a box of Peregrina kisses, and she sent me another note back saying, G. Keith, I really love your kisses. I'm starting to feel a little confident now. So then I sent her another note back saying, I'd like to take you out to dinner, and would you meet me at a little village restaurant? Sat maybe about 15 people, and my friend at the record company told me, hey man, this would be the spot to have dinner with her. At the time, she had a Rolls Royce, and her driver was Gloria Gaynor's brother, Arthur. And at the time, I had a Bentley. I didn't want to show off and say, I'll come over and pick you up and take you in my Bentley. I figured she's got a Rolls Royce. She'll drive down, have Arthur drive her down. Well, she didn't RSVP, so I didn't go down there. So the next time I'm at Regine's, they told me Diana is here. When she sees me walking in, she gets up and starts walking away.
Oh, no.
So that's when it hit me. Well, maybe she went down
you
there
stood her up.
and I didn't show up. But she didn't RSVP, so I didn't know. So anyway, that's one of my Diana stories. The other part is one night I'm at this roller skating rink, Metropolis, and performing that night was Gene Simmons, Cher, and Sarah Dash, whom I used to go with. And Sarah Dash was from the doll, you know, Lady Marmalade and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to look over to my right, and two people in front of me was Diana Ross again. And I said, hi, Diana, how are you? And I said, I really, really would like to kiss you. She says, okay. And again, she did that pucker thing, and I couldn't kiss her on the lips. I kissed her on the cheek. She again was stunned, but there were so many people around us, I just couldn't bring myself to kiss those puckered lips like that. So Diana Ross probably thinks I'm a punk, okay?
That's great. That's great.
So now I got another story that I'll tell you about Aretha Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
We all love Aretha, the Queen of Soul, but one day, Lena Horne's manager called me and said, Mr. Alexander, would you like some tickets to go see Lena Horne's one-woman show? I said, sure. I said, like 3 tickets, please. He said, sure. So I took 2 young ladies with me. We're sitting in the second row, dead center, looking right at Lena Horne. After the show, her manager comes and said, Mr. Alexander, would you like to go backstage and meet Lena Horne? I said, sure. As I'm approaching Lena Horne, I see she's standing there with Aretha Franklin. So as I get there, the manager says, Ms. Horne, I'd like to introduce you to G. Keith Alexander. And before I could say anything to Ms. Horne, Aretha Franklin says, you're G. Keith Alexander? I said, yes, I am. She says, I used to lay on the sofa. She didn't say sofa, she said couch. I used to lay on the couch with my legs wide open listening to you on the radio. I was so embarrassed because I'm standing with Lena Horne, who's so demure looking and everything, and so, you know, so elegant looking. And I'm with the 2 ladies that I'm with, and Aretha says that. I was really, really embarrassed.
That's a great story. That's a great
God.
story. Will there ever be a time like that again with clubs like Regine's and Studio 54? And it was such a time. I mean, the celebrities that would come out, they don't put themselves out there like that anymore. I don't think.
I don't think that there's a place in New York now where the groups of celebrities hang out. And certainly we don't have the type of entertainment venues that we once had during that period of time. I very seldom run into celebrities nowadays. Usually I have to call on the telephone to book them for my show. But there's no place that I have found as of yet where they hang out en masse.
Let's talk about your show. You are the founder of Harlem America Digital Network. What inspired you to create the platform, and what impact do you hope it'll have on the media industry and the community?
Well, that's a very good question. And just for the listening public, for those who are not aware of Harlem America Digital Network, it is a vibrant platform dedicated to showcasing the rich cultural tapestry and creative expressions originating from Harlem. And we provide a stage for Harlem's artists and creators and entrepreneurs to share their stories and talents and innovations with the global audience. And our purpose is to bridge local creativity and with international recognition, and to foster a community that values authentic representation and inclusive growth. And that's what Harlem America Digital Network is about. So what got me started on wanting to create something like that was having worked for 5 of the top New York radio stations, having been an entertainment reporter at Fox TV, the local, not the network, having been an entertainment reporter on HBO. When Matt Lauer left HBO Entertainment News Report, they called me in and I did 3 shows to replace him. And having done that, and the Ebony Jet Showcase, which I was a correspondent in 107 TV stations around the country, I decided it was time for me to start my own media network. Back in like 84, 85, Wall Street TV Report, they had a TV journal that came on every week. And they interviewed me, followed me around with video cameras for a weekend. And the interviewer asked me, "Gee, Keith, what do you see for yourself in the future?" And I told him, well, I want to have an office building with my initials on it, like ABC, CBS, FBI, CIA. I want GKA on the building. And then I said, I want to have my own sports team. And then I told him I'd like to have my own media network, my own radio television network. And he said to me, well, gee, Keith, be for real. And I looked at him and I said, that is going to be my reality. This network is something that I've wanted to have ever since the 80s. And the financial barrier was too great then. Now the barrier has come down and it was easier to start. And I said, well, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? So it took me a while in the planning, and I was able to partner with Voice America. And Voice America has been doing the audio part of what I do for about 22 years. They have like 200 to 300 hosts at any given time on their network, and they're in 140 different countries. So I partnered with them so that they would take care of my back end, and they would run my audio from my Zoom across their network, and we'd run the audio across Harlem America, and then we would put the video portion on our TV network, Harlem America TV. But I decided that wasn't enough. I wanted to be able to give the Black entrepreneurs and business owners a place where they could build fame, fortune, and followers around their businesses and brands. So that's why we wanted to create the podcast where we would sell to them, and they'd have a 13-week pilot program where we would coach them. We provide the marketing and the intros and outros like I did for you. We'd give them a dedicated engineer who would let them know when it's time to go to commercial breaks. So we provide all of that for our clients. And that's the second component. The third component is we wanted to be able to showcase the rich Harlem culture and showcase it so that we can help bring tourists into Harlem so that they can spend some of that money, and the money would circulate in the Harlem community. And we know that 61 million people came to New York from various parts of the world, and we would like to think that a few million of them, by bus, by walking tours, they like to come up to Harlem to see the different soulful cuisines and see the culture and visit the Schaumburg and the Apollo and all that. We haven't gotten to that level yet, but part of our mission is to be able to talk to them as well. And with the various forms of software, which now you can convert into any language, and we can now begin to do that. So that's the reasoning for starting Harlem America.
That's fabulous. GKA is your legacy, and this is something that is really serving the community and others through your channels. You have witnessed and reported on countless stories of success and fulfillment. What advice do you have for individuals looking to live their happiest lives at every age and stage?
Now, that's a good question. I've given that some thought. First of all, you've got to find something you really, really enjoy doing. Something that you enjoyed so much that it's not really work, that you would do it even if they didn't pay you, although it's nice to get paid. But that's one thing. The other thing is you've got to want to develop your talent. You want to be able to look at what other people are doing and not necessarily copy what they're doing, but you look at it and you tweak it so that it becomes yours. And then you have to have determination. The level of your success is determined by the level of your determination, I always say. So that's what I would tell people, that if you really, really, really want to be happy at what you're doing, it's got to be something that you really enjoy doing, because there are many people, and God bless them, they go to work every day and they hate it. And it translates into misery in their lives and with their family, and they bring it all home, that they hate their fellow workers, they may hate their boss, they don't like the job, so you got to find something you really, really love.
We agree with you 1,000%. So if you could go back and give advice to your younger self in your 20s, 30s, what would you say?
What would I say to my younger self? During that period of time in my life, I did a lot of reading. And like I said, when I was younger, I used to read the World Book Encyclopedias. But during the time in my 20s and my 30s, I used to go to Barnes and Nobles, and I'd sit there for hours and look through books and even books I had no idea that I even had interest in. I'd end up buying them and bringing them home, even though I may not have completely read them. They were books that I thought would help me to become a better person, or books that would give me insight into how successful people carried on their businesses. So that's one thing I would say. Find reading materials that you're interested in and that will help to develop you. And also know that at 20 years old, you don't know it all yet. I'm still learning at the age I am now.
Talking about learning, you started in a time where radio, digital content in general was different, was acquired differently. And I remember those days of recording music from the radio on my cassette recorder, and then spending hours stopping and starting and rewinding so I could write the lyrics down.
Wow.
And now you put on Spotify and magically all the lyrics just appear with every song, and it's right there in front of you. And I think I would never give up, having lived through analog sound, the sound of the needle on vinyl. I still have a turntable upstairs, and I'm sure you have more than one turntable. To have lived through all of the technological changes, how has that been for you, adapting to where we are now? What do you see is the next step for what we're doing?
Well, I have taken it all in stride, Robert. Years ago, I remember predicting that they would not have such a need for voice talent. And I remember years ago, I would say, years from now, they're going to have automated voices that will do some of the work that we voiceover artists or voiceover actors, now we call ourselves voiceover actors, do. And then I remember back in 1995, this guy was trying to convince me that records, as we know them, wax records, were going to be obsolete, that everything would be digital. Now, I didn't know what digital was at the time, and I didn't quite believe him, but this guy was adamant about it, that things were going to go digital. As I saw it develop, it wasn't a surprise to me. I just kind of took it in stride. Because I'm such an entrepreneur, and because media is my life, unlike people who perhaps are outside of the media business and they have regular jobs where they may have been, what? I can't believe. Oh, you mean we can do this? They're doing that now? Well, that wasn't me. I believe in the Mark Cuban philosophy, and that is what's new, what's hot, and how can I get there first? So I just kind of rode this wave, and now I'm riding the wave of AI. And I know that you and I spoke about AI some time ago, Robert, but AI had kind of broken out. But now I'm on to, at least 20 or 30 different AI programs. I'm learning as much as I can about AI so I can bring that into my business as well. It's fun for me. It's just part of how I'm wired, that this new technology, I've been following it from the beginning. When the computers came out, I remember like 1980, 87, 88, when the Macintosh came out and the woman on the commercial had the hammer and she walked through this room and threw the hammer at the screen, and it was like the explosion for Macintosh. Well, back in 88, I remember paying $10,000 for my first Macintosh computer, and it only had like 20 megabytes of memory. And then I went out and bought my mother one. I've been following this technology for some time, and nothing surprises me.
I think that being able to embrace change is what keeps us going. Like you said, you're wired this way, and it really does have to be part of your makeup in order to be willing to be at what I call the bleeding edge and learning how to do it. They say an entrepreneur takes a big bite and then learns how to chew, and that's really what we do. We kind of figure it out, and we're always thinking about ways in which it can be incorporated into what we've already done and what we've learned. It's just new building blocks on top of the wisdom that comes along with the experiences that we've had.
But importantly, it's about the people that come into your life, and we're grateful you've come into ours. I'm curious, is there anyone on your wish list that you want to meet, or any new goals that you want to achieve for what's next for GKA, G. Keith Alexander?
I've met so many people. I could give you a list of folks that are just amazing to me, that a guy who grew up on the west side of Chicago, some people might call it the ghetto, that I'm here in New York, and I've been part of what makes entertainment happen in the media capital of the world, the entertainment capital of the world, the financial capital of the world. And I've met so many people in and out of show business. The Harlem America Digital Network is my focus right now. We've got 10 TV channels, 10 audio channels, 10 live stream channels. And my focus right now is trying to either develop content or acquire content and bringing other people who fit Harlem America into the fold. I can't envision right now anything beyond digital platforms. The only other thing would be robots. I mean, actual physical robots, because right now we have AI, and they're going to put AI into the robots. So that's the only thing I can envision. And maybe one day I'll own a robot.
I love everything that you shared with us. And I think there are certainly moments that happen that can't be created in the digital world. And I'm just fortunate that I was brought into the fold of Harlem Week during a time when things were pretty much upside down and we were in the middle of a pandemic, and the choice was, do we stop having this festival that's been going on for then, which was 46 years? Do we stop having it? And luckily for me, the right introductions were made, and I was able to help keep it going through COVID, and fortunately was kept on to now be able to help, along with you and the rest of the team, bring Harlem Week to the world for what amazes me is as really the first time in close to 50 years that it was broadcast to the world, and due in large part to what you do in the course of what is now 13 or 15 days of programming in such a professional way under less than desirable circumstances, being out in the middle of the street in Harlem with all that's going on. Yet we still produce television right there in the middle of the street. And that just amazes me that we're able to do such a high quality program. And I think what we can attribute that to is the enormous amount of experience that goes into making that happen. And I don't think it could happen with a less experienced team in place.
Well, you are certainly a very integral part of making that happen. You're directing and producing the 3 major days, and I know you're involved in more than the 3 major days, but the 3 major days of the Great Day in Harlem at Grant's Tomb, and then the Summer in the City at 135th and St. Nicholas, and then Harlem Day, 135th and St. Nicholas the very next day. It's all due to your making everything that seems chaotic to work very smoothly. If people want to see some of your work, they can go to harlemamerica.com and check out the GHCC channel, the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce channel, where Harlem Week is being broadcast on that channel. And also they can go to harlemweek.com and also check out some of your work. So you're a very important part of how the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce is able to get their message out to the world.
It's a wonderful collaborative experience, and all of the sites that you mentioned will be in the show notes.
We really can't thank you enough for being a part of this episode of Between Over and Next.
To us, it's always about the power of story. And we really believe that there is so much wisdom and experience and lessons, and really the people that you're connected to. Not only our relationship that is newer, but all of the people along the way.
Yeah, for sure. G. Keith, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for lending us your voice to begin and end each of our episodes. We are truly honored that you will forever be a part of Between Over and Next, and we are thankful for that.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, and you guys keep having those great guests and letting the rest of the community, the people who are following you guys, learn from the very intelligent and experienced guests that you have on your show.
Thank you, G. Keith, and I look forward to many more years of collaboration with you.
It'd be my pleasure.
We could have easily gone on for hours and hours of stories that G. Keith could have shared with us, because he is just modest in terms of who he's been in front of. Just absolutely amazing. What is so incredible for me, and I think you feel it too, is there is so much history in Harlem. From seeing names on streets to meeting people who actually knew these historical figures firsthand, spent time with them. And G. Keith has been woven into the fabric of Harlem through all of these decades from his radio career. And I tell you, not knowing, I am sure I listened to him on the radio because I listened to all of those stations growing up in the 70s and the 80s. KTU, 92, KTU with Paco. That was what we listened to. It was absolutely my world back then. And I say it a million times, there are no coincidences. And the fact that I am now friends with this man and work with this man professionally, and having had so much history, I know I have had his voice in my ears in decades past.
I love that he gives voice to Harlem. He's an influential person in Harlem.
And well respected, and truly one of these people who, when his name gets mentioned, there's always a positive note that follows. Always. Because he's such a good guy, and he's someone that people can depend on, and he's helped out in a pinch, even in the short time that we have worked together over the last 4.5 years. I'm just fortunate to be a part of the team that he's a part of. So I'm looking forward to this Harlem Week and many more.
Well, something he didn't mention is that he's host of the show What's Hot.
It airs on Friday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern.
We'll include a link in the show notes.
And his guest list are just like A-list.
This network features CEOs, entrepreneurs, coaches, doctors, lawyers, experts, thought leaders, entertainment celebrities, and nonprofits.
And nobody says no to G. Keith Alexander. He gets everybody, and I am
so he already
thrilled
has.
We got him.
I am thrilled that we had him. He has millions of listeners, and we encourage you to become one of his next new fans.
I couldn't agree more. And every one of his interviews that he does is terrific.
And
really
delivers on-air fun and engaging entertainment experiences. And that's what it's all about. We can relate to that, can't we?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So thank you for listening to Between Over and Next.
And thanks again. I said it to him, and I'll say it again. We love the fact that he's our voice at the beginning and he's our voice at the end. So thank you to G. Keith for being our guest and for being a part of Between Over and Next forever and ever. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Between Over and Next. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it meaningful and insightful.
If you value it to be worthwhile, please share it with your friends and family.
We would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to write a review for us. Your feedback will help us continue to create content that resonates with you.
And don't forget, in the show notes, you can find all the relevant links mentioned in this episode, from accessing free downloads to visiting our website and more.
If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Simply send us an email. Our email address is hello@hollyandrobert.com. We're always excited to connect with our listeners.
So until next time, thank you again for joining us on Between Over and Next.
Thank you for listening to Between Over and Next, the podcast that navigates the twists and turns of life with courage, laughter, and a whole lot of inspiration. Tune in every Tuesday to hang out with Holli and Robert on your favorite podcast platform. Visit hollyandrobert.com and follow them on social media to ignite your passion and fuel your dreams.